Hello, everybody. Come on in and find a seat. What a great crowd we have here tonight. This is so exciting. My name is Kim Daniels, and I am the director of Georgetown's Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, where we work to bring principles of Catholic social thought to national and global conversations, build bridges across political and religious divides, and help a new generation see their faith as central to their life and work. We are so excited tonight to be here for this special Salt and Light, Jesuitical, and Leadership Roundtable collaboration on a listening church in a divided nation with Cardinal Wilton Gregory, held in conjunction with Leadership Roundtable's 2024 Catholic Partnership Summit. So welcome to you all for being here. We also want to welcome the 1,500 of you who are already signed up online, and we know that many, many more will be watching in other platforms. We're so glad that since we began streaming our online dialogues, we've brought the principles of Catholic social teaching to over 310,000 people. Tonight, we'll have two parts to it. First, Zach Davis and Ashley McKinless will record a live Jesuitical podcast with Cardinal Wilton Gregory, asking him how the church can better listen as a community of faith and how young people can live their faith in a divided nation. As you know, Cardinal Gregory is the Archbishop of Washington, a member of the Vatican Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life, and the former president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. He was appointed by Pope Francis as the first African-American cardinal and as a member of the Synod on Synodality. After that, Zach, Ashley, and Cardinal Gregory will be joined by my colleague Anna Gordon, the Initiative's program director and member of the Young Adult Advisory Committee for the 2024 Catholic Partnership Summit, and Fatima Vasquez Molina, the service coordinator at Elizabeth Seton High School in Bladensburg, Maryland, a graduate of Catholic University, to talk about how young adult Catholics can embrace synodality in our church, pursue justice, engage in dialogue, and use the principles of Catholic social teaching to seek the common good. So now I'll turn it over to Zach and Ashley and Cardinal Gregory, and please join me in welcoming them.
Thanks so much, Kim. It's so good to be here. This is a very warm room. So Ashley and I are from
warm crowd
in more ways than one. But so Ashley and we are from Jesuitical, which is a podcast from America Media, which is a national Catholic media ministry published by the Society of Jesus. You might know them as the Jesuits. We host a podcast every week where we're trying to recreate or have in real time conversations that you might have with a friend over dinner, maybe at the bar stool. We're just trying to figure out what it means to be a young Catholic in the world today. We are going to be, this is a live recording, as Kim said, so when...
laugh at those jokes.
Yeah, if Cardinal Gregory makes a joke, laugh. If I try to make one, you can cry. That's fine too. But with that, I will pass it over to Ashley.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming out. This is also, I grew up here, so it's a little bit of a homecoming for me. Yeah, my prom was in the ballroom over. So Cardinal, we're going to start at the beginning of your story. You have such a fascinating conversion story. You chose to join the Catholic Church when you were much younger than everyone in this room. And I'm so curious, so you went to a Catholic grammar school and decided pretty early on that you were going to be a priest and you were going to become Catholic, in that order. But I'm curious, at such a young age, what was your vision of the church? Like, how did you experience it, and what was so attractive about it to you?
Well, first of all, I followed the path that a lot of inner city kids follow in going into a Catholic school. My parents were concerned about the quality of education that was available in the public school system at that time. And the Catholic community was undergoing a rapid racial change. And so the school was welcoming non-Catholic kids. And that's how I identified and then went to the Catholic schools. It was an important moment, too. It was 1958. Historically, this is long before Most of you were on the scene, you know. But in Chicago, it was the year that Cardinal Stritch went to Rome. So we got a new archbishop, and Archbishop Albert Gregory Meyer. 6 weeks after I went to Catholic school, Pope Pius XII died. No cause effect. But it was also the year that John the 23rd was elected. And so there were all kinds of exciting things going on. I was 11 years old. Most kids at 11 are mesmerized by, news stories.
Baseball.
Baseball, But I was also very fortunate. The two priests there were three, but there were two priests in particular. The pastor was Monsignor John Hayes, who was involved with social justice. He was the predecessor of George Higgins at USCCB. He had that desk. And Jerry Weber was the catechist who worked with Kilgallen and Sister Mary Michael O'Shaughnessy, and they were writing a catechism. And I was just mesmerized. The Adrian Dominicans, I know I got a Dominican here, but the Adrians were the teachers, and between that energy, I just said, I want in. So I told John Hayes about a month, 2 months, I'm going to be a priest. And he said, it would be helpful if you were Catholic. Helpful. So I then began to take.
But they took you seriously.
They took me seriously as an 11-year-old. I took catechetical lessons on Tuesday after school, and they, of course, spoke to my parents and said, this is what he wants to do. Is it okay? They said yes. And then I was baptized, made my first Holy Communion at the Easter Vigil in '59, confirmed.
And they ordained you at 14?
Well, almost. Confirmed on Ascension Thursday. But the interesting thing is that, I went into Quigley and Niles and all the seminaries. When I became bishop in '83, the two priests that were my chaplains were John Hayes and Jerry Weber. Wow. And as we're walking down the main aisle of Holy Name Cathedral, Jerry looked at me and says, I'll be damned. So it was, that's in a capsule.
Now, for a lot of young people who've decided to stay in the church, and for anyone who's decided to be engaged and an active participant, we all have these moments where we have to recommit ourselves, right? I'm curious, as you've gone through your ministry, what has that been like for you? Have there been particular moments where you felt like, this is different, and I still want to stay, and I still want to serve?
Obviously, one of the issues that our church has faced and continues to face is the sexual abuse of minors crisis. And I was involved in that when, under the guidance of Cardinal Bernardin, who I think gave me wonderful guidance. And then I went to the Diocese of Belleville, which was rocked at that moment. And then I became president of the conference at the time that 2002. I have very bad timing. But the thing that I kept in the back of my mind was Jerry Weber and John Hayes were such wonderful men in my life. And I said, they should not die with that shadow. And so I was committed to try to do the right thing. And let's face it, we still got a long way to go, a very long way to go.
Yeah, and internally, what did that look like? Because I know the structures and the changes that were made to the way the church functions, but as a priest, as a Catholic, what was it like to go through that?
Well, in some respects, it made me love the church more because as a husband, if I can use that example, I don't think you ever love your wife more than when she needs you. And so that's how I really felt. about the church that I loved. There were times when I was absolutely, frustrated. In the times that I made 13 trips to Rome in the 3 years that I was president. And I kept hearing from then many of the curial officials that this was an American problem, this was an English-speaking problem. There was denial. There was absolute denial. But I kept pushing forward and dealing with Pope John Paul II. I told him everything that I knew, and I said, Holy Father, this is what's going on. And I felt if I die, I can die saying, I told him the truth. And people, I'll be blunt. There were some of the officials that said, of course this is the end of your career. So I said, well, be that as it may, I don't want it to be the end of my church.
Now, you have had lighter conversations with popes over the years.
Yes.
In fact, talk about a transition. The image we were using to promote this event, there's this great photo of you and Pope Francis just cracking up over something. I'm curious, what's it like to work with Pope Francis?
In many respects, he's like Grandpa. Mm-hmm. You can tell him anything. You can tell him anything, and he's not offended. The week of the consistory that I was named at was Thanksgiving week in 2020. And the Holy Father knew that it was Thanksgiving, and I was the only American.
Can I say something? There's always Vatican news over Thanksgiving. And as a Catholic journalist in the United States, that's really annoying. So if he knows... Did you just put a word in? Sorry to interrupt, but...
Well, he invited me to have lunch with him on Thanksgiving. So it's just the Holy Father and I. And we started talking about family. And I said, he wanted to know, I have 2 sisters. I'm the oldest of 3. And I said, Holy Father, the fact, because we're in COVID, that they can't come to this event, I'm sure it's really hard for them. But I said, Holy Father, when they realized that they couldn't go shopping, it was all okay. And then I asked him about his family. He's the oldest of 5, and I think he has the youngest and is a sister. And I said, does she come over to Rome? He says, well, she comes over to Italy, but she doesn't come down to see me. She visits the family from northern Italy, from where his family immigrated from. So we laughed about family, and obviously his English and my Spanish are just about. And I said, Holy Father, my Spanish married my Italian and produced one ugly child. Well, he just laughed. He roared.
So enough to make a joke.
Yeah.
So I want to get to your most recent time in Rome for this synod. But before we get to there, I'm wondering when Pope Francis first mentioned this as a priority, synodality. I think a lot of us were like, what does that mean? Was that a term that you understood? And was it a way that you experienced the church either in Chicago or Atlanta or here in DC before the synod on synodality?
Well, whenever I've experienced the church, when it's been in true dialogue and open conversation, I experienced synodality. I didn't refer to it as that, but wherever the church gathers, where everyone feels respected and has an opportunity to open their hearts, that's synodality. But the meeting that we had in October, and we will have again this coming October, it was the entire church in microcosm. Men and women, young and old, clergy and religious. And we sat at those tables and we got to know each other and speak to each other about things that were important to us as Catholics. One of the first things we did at our table, and I suspect it was done, there were 36, 37 tables. I think it was done at almost every table. What do you want to call? What do you want to be called? So, bishops and cardinals said, well, I'm Wilton. But one of the best one was Archbishop Timothy Costello, who is the Archbishop of Perth. And he said, well, my name is Timothy, I think it's Timothy Patrick. He said, but don't call me Timothy Patrick because that's the name that my parents used when I was really in trouble. So he was Tim, And it broke the ice. It allowed us to exchange and to engage and to disagree, but without destroying the other person's humanity.
What was the local process like here in DC? What were you hearing from people? What were their concerns? What was it like trying to reach out to people that maybe aren't always super engaged in the church here?
Well, I have to bow to this lady that's here in the front row, Dr. Janine Marino, who organized our meetings. And what happened was the people saw their bishops in a different moment. The auxiliaries went around and did some of the meetings, and I did one. I think I did the final one. And people, they told us a couple of things. They said, we want to know our bishops, and not just when you come for confirmation or a parish jubilee.
And you said, be careful what you ask for.
I should have. But there was a desire that came from those meetings to have a greater affinity between the people of God and their bishops, and to talk about tough things. And there were some very, challenging moments in those meetings. We talked about the church's attitude towards marriage, gender identity, the traditional mass, and I mean, so folks put it out on the table, and they listened. Sometimes they cried. There were times when, in some of those meetings, when people started talking about their experience with the church, it drove them to tears. But I'm glad they had the opportunity to open their hearts in front of me and in front of the other bishops. Many of them carried sorrows of things that had happened to them in the church that they finally got to put on the table. And I'm sure there were other things that, if we continued that, and that's what they wanted. They wanted a continuation of these conversations. We'll learn more.
And how have you tried to bring that conversation style and those concerns back to DC? Because this year, between the first session and the second session, is supposed to be a time for more listening and hopefully reaching more people, young people. So what's happening in the Archdiocese now to keep that conversation going and to get wider input?
Well, I'm fortunate because in every diocese where I've been the bishop, we've always had a diocesan pastoral council. So there is present, and there was present even before the Synod, an opportunity for me to meet with a group of my people, and there's no holds barred. They want to know about what's going on. And
could you say what group? Because sometimes those diocesan pastoral council, that can be one of those words for young people that just I have no idea what that means. So who comes to this? What's on the agenda?
Our Diocesan Pastoral Council here in Washington has about 25, maybe 25 to 30 lay people primarily. And they represent a regional diversity, age group. We have young adults on our Diocesan Pastoral Council. We've got clergy. We've got people with disabilities. And they sit around the table and they can propose items that they want to talk about. And I tell them there's nothing, forbidden. One of the people in the history of the church that I know was then Archbishop Pio Laghi, then Cardinal Pio Laghi. He was at the North American College once, and he asked the students who were there to talk to the apostolic delegate, nuncio. He said, you can ask any question. There's no such thing as an inappropriate question.
Noted.
There's only inappropriate answers. So, that's the kind of environment our pastoral council
So
has.
I want to pick up on that because Zach and I were able to go to Rome to cover the synod as journalists, not as participants. And one thing we did kind of pick up on is that bishops from different parts of the world had different degrees of familiarity with these kind of conversations. And so it sounds like you're used to having these conversations and listening. So I'm wondering, what about this process is challenge you to go beyond that? What more is being asked of you in terms of creating a listening church?
Well, in the Archdiocese of Washington, the epicenter of division, we have to learn how to focus on the issue and not the person. It seems to me that one of the reasons we're in such a divisive stance is that we've shifted our focus in many cases to from questions of opinion, et cetera, to personal attack. And I'm talking on this is being broadcast. In every political arena that I've ever read about, especially if it's a time of election or some moment like that.
Is that coming up?
And what planet are you on? Politicians and have always had differing attitudes, opinions. But the social media has given differences an energy and a power that I don't think they've ever had before. When Abraham Lincoln or some of these other great American political figures were running for election, there were people that threw lobs against them. But they could do that with 5,000 leaflets or pamphlets, which may or may not have been read. Now, with social media, whatever was suggested on Monday morning at 10 o'clock is broadcast every place, including the insulting things about people or their lives or their families. That's part of the division. And kids, it's infected our church. Mm-hmm. It has infected our church, where we are, I think in the theological world, there's been lots of disagreement. I think Aquinas and Bonaventure, didn't see eye to eye. And they may still be arguing in the heavenly kingdom. I don't know. But I think right now it's it's degenerated into personal attack.
Yeah. And do you think that's why one thing we heard at the Synod was that there was no polarization? It's one of the things we kept hearing over and over again.
Yeah.
And is it the being face-to-face? I assume you guys weren't tweeting during the table discussions.
The House of Representatives could use some round tables, you're saying?
They could. and cut off the social media when they're talking about important life issues. Talk to each other about the things that are important to us as a people, as a church, and not talk to the social structures that carry that, you know.
Being Archbishop of Washington, what advice do you have to either young people or anyone who feels sort of checked out at best with politics, or sort of deeply distrustful of it, disengaged? Do you have any words of hope or advice?
One of the reasons I agreed to participate in this event was that I have a great deal of hope that our young people will be able to guide us through
It's a lot
this.
of pressure put on us.
Yeah, well, in the 50s and 60s, the young people that were confronted with the civil rights movement, that was a lot of pressure. And, you know, some of them, yeah. So I think every generation has its own, you know, it inherits the problems and the possibilities that belong to a given age. But for example, in the Archdiocese of Washington, our Catholic Charities outreach is probably, I hope I can say this, it's the largest social service vehicle outside of the government. I mean, we feed more people and help people process visas, and we do all of that stuff. We have a ton of young adults who work, you know, constantly with the social service arm of Catholic Charities. What we can't do is we can't get them to Mass. We can get them to feed the poor, to help the poor find housing, to help immigrants, you know, find the legal assistance, but to get them to the Lord's table, we have, and let's face it, Catholicism needs both lungs. Pope John Paul II used to talk about breathing with two lungs from the Eastern and Western traditions of the church. But our social justice and our faith doctrine have to be wedded to each other, you know. You can't, one of the difficulties that the COVID presented was it added to this attitude that you can go to church by watching it on social media, you know. You can podcast your Mass. Catholicism is a physical experience. You need the smells and bells. You need to look down the pew and see the woman that lives, you know, 2 blocks away, and you need to hear the music.
You didn't say homily.
No. I'm getting to it. But I hope one of the things we can take from this moment, which I am glad we're passing through, if we haven't passed through, is we can't be Catholics just visually, you know. We have to be Catholics next to each other. I've got to break bread with you. I've got to see, I got to walk down the aisle as the celebrant and see the kid. I love going down the aisle, and the little ones, those of you who have kids, the little ones are on the edge, and they're, but they're, they want that physical dimension of encounter, which Pope Francis, that's one of his watchwords, encounter.
Yeah. And one thing he talks about in terms of interfaith dialogue is doing and praying together before we get to the hard theological questions. And I'm wondering if, in your experience, you would think that divisions between Catholics would be less severe than between different faiths, but it doesn't always feel that way. So I'm wondering if in your experience with things like Catholic Charities and other on-the-ground service, has that been a vehicle for depolarizing the church in Washington, D.C.?
It's helped. Let me give you an example of what I thought was absolutely one of the wonderful moments of the Senate. It wasn't in the Senate, it was preparatory. It was the ecumenical prayer service that preceded it. I don't know if any of you saw, but it was multicultural. It had a lot of young people, and they came as young people. They came with jeans and Birkenstocks, and the church invited the young people to come to church as young people. This is St. Peter's. This is a church where you could have a Kappa Magna, not that was any were worn, but the same church that can get all dressed up with the and I got a set of those things, but it welcomed young people as young people. And I just thought it was wonderful. And it was ecumenical. We had, people from various faith traditions were there to pray together.
Yeah, I have a friend, I won't call him out because I think he's here tonight, but who was fine wearing a baseball cap in the Synod Hall every day. So I share that. Cardinal Gregory, we want to thank you and just wrap up this part of the conversation. But before we do that, we have one final question for you.
Yes, so we ask all of our guests this, and it's if you could canonize one person, living or dead, Catholic or not, fictional or real, who would it be and why?
I would push the cause of Thea Bowman.
Sounds like she doesn't need an introduction for this crowd. But for those watching at home who maybe don't know who she is, can you give a little brief bio?
Sister Thea Bowman was a Franciscan sister, African-American Franciscan sister, who was a evangelist, a dynamo. And if you want to know, if you got about 25 minutes, get the YouTube picture of Thea addressing the bishops in Newark. She says it all. She says it all. I think we need people like now her cause is going forward. It's hard to become a saint. It's harder to be declared a saint. But she'd be the one.
Okay.
Cardinal Gregory, thank you so much for joining us and recording this podcast.
Yes, thank you. So we're excited to continue this conversation with Anna and Fatima. So first, I want to start with you, Fatima. What has been your experience as a young person in the Archdiocese of Washington as we've, in the past couple of years, tried to become a more listening church? What have been your opportunities to share your hopes and struggles for the church here?
Right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Wow, this is a packed room. Okay. Well, I think my first point to this question would be the way to a listening church is through immersion. And like you said, encounter. I think that's the best way for a listening church to continue to listen to its people. I currently work as a service learning coordinator at Elizabeth Seton High School. I'm the campus minister. I have a lot of hats on over there at Seton. And in my short 6 months right now at Seton, I realized that the way of immersing yourself into that community or to any young adult or youth community is through immersing yourself into their own culture. And what do I mean by that? Well, a couple of days ago, I was talking about rock bands with a few of my students. Another day, I was talking about one of them wants to open their new flower business in Riverdale. Another day, I was talking to one of them about we have a tradition at Seton now of having a bilingual mass on the Immaculate Conception feast day. And it started when I was back a student in 2019, so you can do the math after that. But the students, the Latino students at Seton said, Miss VM, are you going to wear your traditional dress? And I was like, oh, no, you're the stars today. You are the stars, and you are the ones that are celebrating this mass. I'm just in the back. They're like, no, we want you front and center with us with your dress. So I'm like, okay, fine. I thought about it, and I pull out the dress, the traditional Mexican dress from my closet, and ironed it, and I came into school with a hot pink traditional Mexican dress. And I realized then that the point of immersing yourself really is an opportunity for you to connect with people that maybe don't see eye to eye, maybe don't agree with you. Many of my students are not Catholic or are still asking themselves the tough questions of who is Jesus? Can I trust him? And so for me, it's more of engaging with them first of all, and then bringing Jesus to them. And I realized that for me now, Jesus is in them now. And it's like, wow, it's just breathtaking to the point now that this past Ash Wednesday fell on Valentine's Day, which is so weird and it's so great. And I gave the little talk to the whole entire school. And I rerouted Ash Wednesday to Princess and the Frog, to The Notebook, and to Another Love Story. And that caught their attention right off the bat. And that right then and there, I understood that in order to immerse yourself, you have to come up with innovative ways to catch their attention, and that's when you go in.
I love that. I feel like that is, in some ways, a huge part of having a lay vocation, even one within the church. I imagine when you go places, most people want to talk about church. Is that?
That would be a pretty good assumption.
They don't want to talk about The Notebook with you?
Yeah. But I love that because, when we serve in the church, we're both ministering to people where they are, but we're also asking them about their favorite rock bands or what are their hopes and their dreams. And sometimes, after that, questions about God will come up. But if they don't first know that we're willing to listen to them about Fortnite or Roblox or something, then they're not going to listen to us at all when we're trying to talk about Jesus.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that now Jesus is in them for you, and that's another, I think, important thing to recognize is God's working there before you even try to, and so that's really wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm curious what some of your reactions are hearing this conversation. What do you think the church can do to make space for young people, especially if they either have one foot in the church, one foot out, maybe they agree with a lot of the things the church says, but they have a couple issues that they're really hung up on. What do you think we need to do to make space to listen to those people?
Thanks, Zach and Ashley. Cardinal Gregory, Fatima, it's so great to be having a mini synodal conversation up here with all of you. I'm so excited to be in this space. I'm really excited about the Catholic Partnership Summit. And just sitting here listening to the first half hour of this conversation, I was unexpectedly moved. As some of you know, I'm usually the one moderating conversations for our initiative for our Salt and Light gatherings, which reach out to young people. But it's really gratifying to hear fellow young adults and also leaders of our church talking about being a listening church, because that's so important to what I do for my day job at Georgetown University. So thanks just for everything everyone shared. But I just want to come back to your question, Zach. I think as Catholics, and not even just young Catholics, all Catholics, each one of us has felt misunderstood at some point. Whether you're maybe a more traditional Catholic, you may not feel welcome in a more social justice-oriented space, or vice versa. A more progressive Catholic may not really feel welcome in a more right-leaning parish or a right-leaning space. And I've even thought for myself, can I really call myself Catholic if I struggle with this issue or with this teaching from the church? And so I think that's something that's very common. And how do we respond to that, and how do we go to those spaces? Well, a few examples or lessons came to mind from what we've done with our Salt and Light gatherings at Georgetown. I think the first thing is having diverse participants in our dialogues. And we do call them dialogues because they're very conversational. And representing not just racial diversity and gender diversity, but also diversity in ideology. We are here in Washington, D.C., where politics is so central and it's so polarized right now. So having conversations that reflect everyone's views in the room, having diversity in terms of age and economic background, and even in careers. I feel like on the East Coast, often we can get stuck into, thinking about certain career types being superior to others. And so we always try and have a sense of diversity on our panels. The other thing we always try and do is not have a binary conversation. We'll never have a dialogue where it's just one person and another, just showing this, the black side and then the white side. We try and have a range of perspectives. We are engaging in dialogue. And we found that really opens up. People feel comfortable because you can see a little bit of yourself in every response. It's not just not a binary. And also creating space to build authentic relationships. We found that that's most effective with food and drink. And more specifically, free food and drink. And so we actually, I'm sorry for everyone here tonight, but we usually begin our conversation with an hour-long happy hour, have a dialogue, and then we have another hour that we call a reception, but it's the same thing as the happy hour. And we found that that's so important to what we're talking about here tonight, of being a listening church, talking about Catholic social teaching, having the challenging conversations and dialogues, but doing it in a space where you feel welcome. You start to recognize people. I'll never forget the first dialogue that we did after COVID in person, and it was our first Salt and Light gathering. So this is for young Catholics under 40. We held it at the Georgetown School of Continuing Studies, and we kind of didn't know if anyone was going to show up. It was like a little bit of a, is anyone going to come to my party feeling? And they did, and it was a full house at the School of Continuing Studies, and I went up to a lot of people during the happy hour, just curious, saying, how did you hear about this? Who are you here with? And so many of those young adults came up and said, I came alone. I just moved here either during the pandemic or right after it, and I read about this on someone's social media feed or whatever, and I wanted to come and see what it was about. And those same people have come back and now are part of our community, and people recognize each other. And it's just a wonderful, I think, example of how you can sort of resist feeling that sense of not feeling heard and not feeling welcome because you built that community.
I always think that's so brave. One of the bravest things you can do is make a friend. And it's so hard. And no one talks about this, how hard it is when you get out of the bubble of just being around your friends that you either grew up with or in college, when you are just surrounded by that. When you get into young adulthood, it's really tough.
It's so hard.
And so when I hear stories of people just putting themselves out there and coming to an event where they don't know anybody, I find myself super moved by that.
Candidly, I would never do that. And so it really is. It's amazing because it's resulted in this incredibly rich community. And I keep talking about our Salt and Light gatherings, but Fatima is very involved in Salt and Light, but also we have something called our Latino leader gatherings, which is engaging young Latino Catholics and being leaders in the church. And that community is it's getting revived just as much as our Salt and Light gatherings. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
There's also free food over there.
Yeah, also free food at the Latino leader gatherings. Yeah.
So Fatima, you spoke so beautifully about how you try to be a listening church to your students. I'm wondering if you could talk about your experience on the receiving end as a young adult in the diocese at Catholic University of America. Did you feel that your voice was valued and listened to, and that you could say things that might make people uncomfortable or challenge the church? What experiences have you had in that regard?
Okay. Well, I think we have to go back to when I was in college. I just graduated last year, so. So I think it was back in 2021 when the first synod started to happen in the parishes. And I promise there's a happy ending to this. But I realized when I went it was like 9 a.m. at one of these, in the parishes, the Archdiocese. And I went in, and all I see is Latinos, but I didn't see anyone that was young like me. And I went with my parents, and I remember I told my mom on the way back home, I was like, Mom, why wasn't there anyone else like me? Like, why wasn't there another young voice like me? And I remember it kind of like frustrated me for a bit, but I didn't let the frustration just like cluster in. I knew I had to do something. And so that's when the work started to happen at Catholic U. And so I worked for the Center for Cultural Engagement at Catholic University. And there, my boss really challenged me in so many different ways, whether that's events, whether that's programming, logistics, everything. But for December 12th, as we all know, it's a big tradition for the Latino, Mexican, American community within the church. And he tells me, like in around October, he's like, Fatima, I need you to do something for December 12th and think about it fast, because we only have a few weeks. I was like, okay, sounds good. So it took me a couple of weeks to think about it. And I really got inspired actually by my own community. So actually my parents are here right in front of, in the front row. And every single year, they create these big altars for Our Lady of Guadalupe, huge. They have big budgets, so they go all out. They go all out. Sometimes they're up in the parish until 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning, building these huge, beautiful altars just for her. I was like, well, I don't have a big budget like them, but let me see what I can do. So I know that my parish is not the same as Catholic U. And so how is a Latina going to introduce this tradition into a predominantly white community and probably never celebrated an Our Lady of Guadalupe feast day within CUA? So what I decided to do was that I created an arch of roses, and every single rose, I told everyone that would come up, put a prayer next to the rose, tie it up, and then put it on the arch. By December 12th, Our Lady was filled with roses and prayers all around it. And in a way, it was so amazing. I wasn't really in the receiving end, but Our Lady was in the receiving end, really. But it showed me that even just the most simplest rose, the most simplest piece of paper can unify a community in such a beautiful way. I remember my junior year, I was doing this, and there was a dude, pretty 6 tall, probably a football or soccer player, and he comes up to the altar, and I was kind of reloading the roses and the papers. He's like, hey, how do you say in Spanish, please help me in my math test? And I was like, come again? He's like, I want to tell her in Spanish to help me in my math final, because Our Lady of Guadalupe Feast Days always falls on finals during CUA. So I tell him, and then we write it out and everything. But it was a moment where me and him were able to engage, and that was like the most beautiful part about it. Now it's a tradition at CUA, but.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on the middle of that story, which was that you were asked to, take charge of this. And the 4 of us are all working in the church as young people, and we've been empowered by people in our lives to frankly be up here. And I want to thank you for joining us and doing that. But it's a risk for a lot of people to, not just make the young person the one that does the social media, right? Oftentimes that's like the only thing a church will let a young person do.
That says he does do the social media.
I'm curious, is that something, do you encounter resistance there or just like hesitancy? And some of it's warranted because I've made a number of blunders, some on social media. But what advice do you give to adults working in the church to listen to young people, but also empower them?
Well, one of the things that I believe that young people can do. I'm the only non-young person up here. I'm representing the geriatric group. Is to ask young people to do those things that they do so regularly and show me. My secretary, who is a young priest, is constantly coming down because I need to have some help on the computer. I think every computer that you buy should come with a 16-year-old in the box. Because they're going to help you figure out how to. So play to your strengths. Mm-hmm. One of the things that Fatima talked about is encounter. Mm-hmm. And the folks that are here from Washington would know this. The church in Houma Thibodaux just lost a tremendously wonderful bishop. Mm-hmm. Bishop Mario Dorsenville had served as auxiliary in the Archdiocese of Washington and was appointed Bishop of Houma Thibodaux in not quite a year. But he had such an impact in 1 year. Mm. He packed more pastoral service in 1 year than most of us can do in 40. And when I went down for the funeral, I was amazed at the number of people. Why? Because he encountered. He let himself be transparent. I was there, obviously, for his installation. And the house that the bishop lived in had a pond in the back, and there was an alligator in the pond. Mario was scared to death. But I think by the end, the alligator felt that he was
Part of the family?
Part of the family, All right. So you got to play to your strength, and his strength was his people gift. Mm-hmm. And that local church will never be the same for that 1 year of his ministry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've focused a lot so far on building a listening church, but I don't want to neglect the other parts of the Synod on synodality. So the 3 themes were participation, communion, and mission. So Anna, I want to talk to you about the mission part of it and how in this church, how your bread and butter of Catholic social teaching, how that can kind of work with synodality to help the church work towards its goals in terms of economic and racial and environmental justice.
I think Catholic social teaching, all the vocabulary and the work that's been done, it's all been synodal before we had the word for it. I know for me, I'm still a young Catholic, but when I was an even younger Catholic social teaching was the most exciting part of my faith. And it still is now. And I still attend Mass. I'm still very engaged in the other elements of my faith. But why I love working at Georgetown with my wonderful colleagues and why I love doing what we do with our Salt and Light and Latino leader gatherings is continuing to talk about Catholic social teaching and encountering people and building that community. And now we have this new language of the Synod to sort of build on that and grow that. And so I think Catholic social teaching has been doing the synodal work all along. And so for me, I just get very excited now that we have the language to start, connecting those dots even more and talking about how Catholic social teaching can be a part of not only our life in church on Sunday and our parish youth group, but also how we engage in public life. Yeah.
I maybe want to start to wrap here. I'm just curious what gives the two of you hope as a young person, both for the church and for the country.
I think my hopes is for more seats to be created at the table. That's my biggest hope, and that's my prayer. As a Latina Catholic, it's not always easy to navigate even the church sometimes, and to be represented, even here today, and representing the community that has guided me to this place is a true testimony that with a lot of effort you can make it and have your voice heard. But not only my voice, there is 300 people behind me that have raised me in the faith. And so for me, it's my hope of creating more spaces for all of us who feel that we probably don't have a seat at the table still. But you do. And I promise we're creating it.
I think it's really hard to engage in politics right now. I don't think I'm the only one who feels that way. But what gives me hope is, sorry to keep talking about it, but Catholic social teaching, there's actually a principle that calls us to participation. And so that call to participate gives me a lot of hope. Pope Francis has talked about sort of his hope for a better kind of politics. That's what the phrase he uses in Fratelli Tutti. And like Cardinal Gregory, I have a lot of hope in my peers and in my colleagues, my young colleagues, also my colleagues who are not as young. But we're building the church, and we're using the principles of Catholic social teaching, and we're engaging and we're participating. And what excites me about this conversation and about the Synod is that it's becoming more institutionalized, and there's now structures, and this is actually how you have a conversation with someone you disagree with. Here are the steps that you can take. And I think that will only benefit our public life, that will only benefit our church. And so that really gives me a lot of hope, is the groundwork that has been laid and that we're continuing to see from the leadership of Pope Francis and from wonderful leaders like those here on this stage, is that's all moving in the direction that I know I first saw when I became, or when I really got engaged in my faith when I was in high school. I also went to Seton, by the way. So Seton representing tonight. So that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah.
Cardinal Gregory?
Last word?
I think one of the things that would foster better listening skills among young people, among all of us, is don't enter the conversation with the conclusion.
But what if I know all the answers?
Then why did you come to the conversation? You know, if you start a conversation with the conclusion, you're not going to be open to hearing what other people might say. And I'm not suggesting that, you know, there aren't things that we believe as true and belong to the deposit of faith and all that. But let me hear what you find difficult. And before I condemn you, let me try to understand you. You can't. One of the things that I love best, I love confirming. And even after 40 years, I still love confirming kids. And one of the things that kids, and we get into dialogue, they'll ask me, do you ever doubt your faith? And I said, sure. Some of the great saints proudly, or maybe not proudly, but openly describe moments of doubt and fear and confusion. Anyone who can live their life of faith and never have any hesitation probably is just it's a veneer. They haven't probed the issues of what it means to belong to Jesus and the price. Today's gospel, you know, that's the price of belonging to Jesus is willingness to become a servant. He said it And I don't think I could say it any better.
I think we'll leave it there. Fatima, Anna, Cardinal Gregory, thank you so much for continuing this dialogue. And can we give them a round of applause? Thank you. So just want to do a couple thank yous. Thank you so much to the teams that have helped put this together, both from the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown, Leadership Roundtable, and everybody who's participating in the Catholic Partnership Summit. Thank you all for being here and for organizing this. It really means a lot. If I could, one quick commercial. We do have a podcast. It is called Jesuitical. If you don't know what a podcast is, Ashley will tell you at the reception. She'll teach you how to download a podcast and put it on your phone. But also, we work at America Magazine, as I said. There are magazines floating around here. If you haven't grabbed one, please grab one. If you missed out, we're trying to spread the word, especially during Lent. We've got a lot of good stuff going on. We have a Lenten deal, if you will. So if you want to try it for $1, if you hit americamagazine.org/trial, and if you forget that, I will help you with that one. But please, we're covering the synod. We'll be there again this fall. So if you want to follow along, follow these conversations, please check us out. And I'll hand it over to parish announcements.
There you go. Parish announcements up here. The old person coming with the announcements. Here I go. First of all, thank you all for joining us here. What a fantastic conversation. What a great crowd here. We have some of those free food and drinks that we talked about in the back of the room. So if those of you who are joining us here in person, please join us back in the back and hang out and let's have some good conversation. I want to just remind you that this conversation has been recorded. It'll be posted at our website. We have all sorts of resources about this conversation there as well. And of course, links to America, links to Jesuitical, all that stuff. So you can find that at the initiative's website. A couple other dialogues coming up that I want to tell you about. And the first one for Catholic Sisters Week. Next week on March 6th, we're having an online dialogue on Catholic sisters working to eradicate human trafficking. 12:30. I really hope you can come and be a part of that. And it's online. Just watch it. It's going to be a fantastic conversation with women who are doing critical work for the church. And let's all actually, while we're here, give a shout out to our Catholic sisters. Great. Just outstanding. They make us proud. They just make us proud to be Catholic. The other dialogue we're going to have on March 12th, we'll be holding a Dahlgren dialogue at Georgetown, the Francis Factor at 11 years, the Synod, lay leadership, and the social mission of the Church. With Cynthia Bailey-Mans, one of the lay delegates, Synod leader Natalie Bakar will be with us. She's here tonight as well. Bishop Daniel Flores, who is the leader of the U.S. Synod process, Chris Ann Valancourt Murphy from Catholic Mobilizing Network, Chris White from the National Catholic Reporter. A fantastic conversation. Please join us. Thank you to our colleagues at the Leadership Roundtable. Thank you for being here on the eve of the Catholic Partnership Summit. Most of all, thanks to our colleagues at America Media. And please join me in thanking our wonderful panel and especially Cardinal Gregory for being here with us tonight.